And welcome to the Walrus Talks Energy at Globe Forum 2022, presented by Suncor. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and we are thrilled to be joining you in person and online. The Walrus Talks goes across the country and back, and this is the first time we've been in person in over 2 years. So it feels great to be here today at the Vancouver Convention Centre, as well as streaming live at the walrus.ca. Hello to the hundreds of people who have registered for our live stream and everyone who's in the room with us right now. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land that we're on, because this whole conference is about the land, environment, sustainability. We're gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, Stola, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. There is a rich history of sharing stories and conversation, and we are honored to continue that tradition. A bit about the Walrus. The Walrus started 19 years ago, really as an optimistic project to tell the stories of Canadians and to spark conversation. And we do that in a number of different ways. Through our fact-based journalism, which you'll see on your table. You can pick up one of the magazines. But our journalism is also available online at thewalrus.ca. Through our podcasts. Our latest podcast is The Deep Dive, where we dive deep into a story or issue of the day, as well as in rooms like this one with the Walrus Talks. And no matter where the Walrus is or how people are engaging with us, we are committed to bringing together a community of interesting and interested people who really care about the issues that matter to our country. So thank you for being a part of this today. Our work is powered by our donors, our supporters, and our partners. Thank you to Suncor Energy for making this conversation possible. Suncor has been a part of the Walrus Talks many times over the years across Canada, and we're grateful for their support. We're also grateful to the entire Globe series for hosting us. We produce events at the Walrus, and I can only imagine how challenging it is to pull out a conference in a pandemic that is always changing. So I tip my hat, or mask I should say, to the team at the Globe. The conversation around clean energy and a net zero future is the now. I really feel, being at the Globe Forum, that this is the moment of possibility. This is a moment of power. And today we'll be hearing from 5 people, entrepreneurs, advocates, and leaders about their work in the energy sector and what lies ahead. So here's how the Walrus Talks works. It's a bit different than some of the other sessions that you've been attending at the Globe Forum. Each talker has 7 minutes, and the talkers go back to back, back to back to back. They're going to be touching on the themes of this conference: innovation and adoption, policy, regulation, and corporate governance, finance and investment, just transition, beyond net zero, ESG globally. Now, there's no Q&A. We save that for the in-person networking post-talks discussion, and we're going to invite you to join us at the market later. On your table, you'll see a QR code. Does someone want to hold it up? Just, you see one of the, excellent. Scan that. You're not going to get a menu, even though that would be nice, but you will get to know our speakers better. It's our online program that will provide you their biographies. Also, we encourage you to share this conversation on social media, the highlights of the talks, or even to our audience at home. Show us where you're joining us from today. Use the hashtag #WalrusTalks. We will be hearing from President and CEO of Questor Technology, Audrey Mascarenhas, Chief Strategy and Technical Officer at EfficiencyOne, John Esaiw, CEO of ESG Global Advisors, Sarah Keys, President and CEO of the Indian Resource Council of Canada, Stephen Buffalo, and Sustainable Development Strategist, Alicia M. Richins. Thank you again for joining us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Audrey Mascarenhas, and I'm President and CEO of Questor Technology. I have been passionate about energy and environment for over 40 years. The first 20 years of my career, I spent it at Gulf Canada Resources, an oil and gas company. The second 22nd years, I've been at Questor, passionate about looking for solutions and innovation around our journey to reducing emissions, protecting our environment and saving lives. Now, you may be wondering why someone like me would leave a successful career in oil and gas and join a startup in 1999 to focus on emissions and environment. My husband certainly did. He said to me, "Help me understand this. You're turning down all these high-paying jobs in oil and gas. No one's ever going to care about emissions or environment, and the nanny's going to make more money than you. Help me understand how this makes business sense." And I said, someday we would need to care about emissions and environment. I have been amazingly lucky in my life and my career, and I really saw this as a chance for me to give back. Now, honestly, I didn't think it would take 22 years to care about emissions and environment, but here we are today. So Questor has focused on developing patented clean combustion technology that destroys methane at 99.99% efficiency. It's a global warming gas that is actually 86 times worse than CO2 over a 20-year period. So it truly is the low-hanging fruit. Additionally, we've been developing a technology that takes wasted, low-grade waste heat and turns it into clean, emission-free power. According to MIT and Stanford, the two largest opportunities to stop the temperature rise that is impactful, inexpensive, and can be done right now, it's simply don't put methane into the atmosphere and improve energy efficiency. I have the privilege to work, speak, and travel all over the world. The one common value that we all share as a human race is that each and every one of us wants our kids to be happy, to have a great life, and to have a great future. And we would do everything, even at the sacrifice of ourselves, to have it so. If you agree with this premise, then shouldn't we all be rolling up our sleeves, putting aside our differences, and figuring out how we can make it so? Instead, I see us having polarizing conversations. We're pointing our fingers to someone else. We focus on the shiny, the sexy, and the moonshots. The belief that is holding us back is that we have to invent a solution and that none exist. We believe that it's going to cost a lot, and I think this has paralyzed us. In 2013, a gentleman by the name of Bertrand Piccard flew a solar plane around the world without any fuel. He believed that if he could do what everyone said could not be done, that there was probably solutions already on this planet that could have an impact on climate change, that would help us get to our sustainability goals. So in 2016, he launched his Solar Impulse Foundation, and he made it the goal to find 1,000 solutions to protect the environment in a cost-effective way and advance our sustainability goals. I am pleased to say that Questor's clean combustion technology and our waste heat to power solutions were chosen by the foundation as one of the 1,000. I'd like to show you a picture. As you can see from this example, it's showing that we can reduce emissions significantly by not putting methane into the atmosphere. What you're seeing there is a pipeline blowdown. This was typically vented. When we vent 5 million standard cubic feet a day of methane, we're putting around 8,000 tons a day of CO2 equivalent. By cleanly combusting it, it's 260. Additionally, there's 17,000 houses surrounding this site. We made an impact by deploying technology around the air quality. We created the social license to operate, but it also shows a very strong business case. We believe the prize and opportunity is large if we focus on methane. Every day, according to the World Bank, we flare and vent over 14.5 billion standard cubic feet a day. We've been doing this for over 50 years. We've made a little progress on reducing it. It has a big impact on air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and it's an enormous waste of energy. What if I told you that for $3.6 billion investment, we could reduce these emissions of 1 gigaton a year? Instead, we have spent our capital, for example, in Canada, on 2 carbon capture projects that will reduce emissions 2 million tons a year. This illustrates that we've got an opportunity to maybe spend this capital more wisely to have an impact. I think our system and our approach to the biggest challenge we have faced on this planet is broken. We continue to have polarizing conversations, and surprisingly, technology innovators, your solution providers, are not at the table with industry and government. In Canada, I think the government believes that technology companies have a vested interest, so they're not included at the table. I think our regulatory system is broken and complicated. So as a result, instead of us rolling up our sleeves to collectively solve this problem, we're busy fighting each other, and as a result, we're failing our children and their children. We're excited about moonshots, solutions that have not been proven yet and need a large amount of taxpayer money to develop. Additionally, they're many years away from making an impact and have considerable risk. Cleanly combusting methane and generating power from waste heat sounds boring in comparison to hydrogen and fusion and a whole bunch of other things. But reality is we need both. We need to deploy the practical, high-impact, cost-effective 1,000 solutions now that are ready to go because it buys us time to prove out the moonshots. We need to be much clearer on what we mean by net zero so that we're ensuring we're solving the right problem. What if I told you that by replacing flaring and venting in the oil and gas industry with clean combustion technology and opportunities to convert the heat to power, we could reduce our emissions at a cost of less than $1 a ton with 100% return on investment and produce the cleanest energy from the planet? The world needs clean energy if we're going to create a great sustainable future for all. The world needs action, not talk. It needs us to step up and lead. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Esaiw, and I'm the Chief Strategy and Technical Officer at EfficiencyOne. And I'm just going to start by sharing a quick story with you. I recently went to visit the dentist, and to my great dismay, the dentist told me, John, you need a root canal. And I can't think of any more terrifying than sitting in a dentist chair and hearing I need a root canal. But that got me thinking of other scary words and scary phrases that exist today. And so we have global pandemic, healthcare crisis, financial crisis, housing emergency. And this one really hits home for me as a Canadian-born Ukrainian, the humanitarian crisis. Makes me feel pretty helpless some days. I then to remind you other concerning word combinations in our industry. We have climate change, climate crisis, climate catastrophe, climate apocalypse. Seems like we keep upping the game here on how alarming we can make this. But I think the shock value is starting to wear off, and we're becoming desensitized to it. And I then think of somewhat less concerning combination and now an ambition, net zero. We can all in some way identify with a root canal, but perhaps not so much with net zero. It doesn't seem terrifying on the surface. It seems a little bit on the nebulous side, a little unclear, a little vague. And many of us have a different definition of what net zero might mean. For me, remove the carbon, let's call that the root of the problem, and remove the pain. So by quick show of hands, how many clearly understand what they think net zero means and could define it to a friend? I'm not seeing a lot of hands. But that's okay, it's complicated. I heard a metaphor here that, if you think of a sink and a tap, and the water's pouring out into the sink, and the CO2 is essentially the water. And if the sink is plugged, then the water keeps filling up, that's the CO2. If the plug is gone, you've got the water coming out, the water draining. The problem now is the sink is overflowing. Achieving net zero, well, that's a long way off. We've heard 2050 is our net zero goal for Canada. 2030 in some European countries, 2060 in China. Some of these are going to outlive us. And my challenge here today is really to get you all excited about policy, regulation, and corporate governance in the context of net zero. A little bit unappealing to some, but let's be clear, without proper policy direction, without accountability, without levels of enforcement, and without significant corporate engagement, we simply won't get there. And so how do we come together to solve this problem in the realm of policy and governance? Now it's time for everyone. Advancing innovative ideas, developing collaborative approaches that are measurable and achievable. And so here's what we know to be true. The unfortunate reality is that we have not materially reduced annual emissions in Canada from 2005 to 2019. That data is out there, it's irrefutable. And Canada is structured such that all provinces, municipalities, corporations, businesses of all types, now we have to come together to meet net zero federal targets. Corporations are trying to do their part by establishing net zero policies and taking actions, but we have a lack of common standards, and it's a difficult task. How are corporate boards, management teams supposed to guide their organizations when there are multiple reporting agencies, standards, measurements, along with the need to comply with municipal, provincial, and federal regulations? Finding a starting point seems to baffle even the most sophisticated of players in this space. CDP Global, someone I consider a leader in this space, gathered data from about 13,000 organizations recently in their 2021 report on their low carbon transition plans. Only about 1/3 of the 13,000 had a plan. Less than 1% of the organizations were able to report on key indicators that showed they had credible climate change transition plans, and only 6% had details of net zero targets. We have a long way to go. So where do we start? Well, reporting isn't enough. Action is needed and enforcement is needed. Boards of directors, executive leadership teams, shareholders must hold their organizations to account. Board members who have depth of understanding on the issues need to hold the corporate feet to the fire and bring in concrete plans to the boardroom. And we just can't have a token director sitting at the boardroom table. We need full buy-in to drive organizational outcomes. As far as concrete action goes, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my home province of Nova Scotia. We're a leader in Canada in reducing carbon emissions. We have regulated hard caps on carbon dioxide emissions in the electricity sector. We've invested significantly in energy efficiency programs. And we've set a target to be 80% renewables of our delivery of electricity by 2030. Energy efficiency programming alone, administered through our energy efficiency regulated utility, the only one of its kind in Canada, known as Efficiency Nova Scotia, has delivered over 1 million tons of CO2 reduction in Nova Scotia over the last decade. Today, we're 30% below 2005 levels, with less reliance on fossil fuels and reducing costs for Nova Scotians. Corporate Knights gives Nova Scotia an A grade in their 2021 net zero report card. We're the only province in Canada to receive that A grade. And Nova Scotia is projected to be 56% below 2005 levels by 2030. But we're not seeing this rate of emissions reductions across Canada. And I say this not to pat ourselves on the back, but really to say that we have government policies, we have corporate buy-in, and results that show that it can be done. We still have a lot of work to do. So the bottom line, there really isn't the easy button here. If you remember the Staples commercials, there isn't one way to solve this. Government action and policy can enable the development of strategies to meet our goals, but influence via government policy on corporations can really only go so far. Each province has to create its own solution. Nova Scotia has to get off coal for power generation, and we have to get off oil for home heating and hot water heating. Ontario is a highly industrialized economy. Quebec has heavy industry that is carbon intensive. Alberta is almost all natural gas for space and hot water heating. Almost 40% of carbon emissions in British Columbia come from transportation. But transportation is a national issue. We all use the same fuels for our modes of transportation. Federally, we've mandated that you can't sell anything but an electric car past 2035, but we need to get on the policies to get the infrastructure in place to get all these cars plugged in. Regulators need to do their part here. Make no mistake. Net benefit to ratepayers can't be the bar that's set in all circumstances any longer. The regulatory framework we've used for decades is not conducive to our net zero future that we're planning for. When cost of action is considered, there would be more than enough evidence and data to support utility applications for GHG reduction mechanisms. Governments need to address this by giving regulators the mandates and oversight needed to manage this more effectively. So where do we go from here? There are challenges to achieving net zero. We can't ignore that fact. We need the advancement of policies and initiatives to create the employment and address social equity. We need action to address the increasing costs of carbon that are coming at us. We really need public education that's well understood. And we all need to step up and take action, big or small. Start to tell those around you what you are doing to make a difference. I don't know about you, but I need some good news. We really haven't had much lately. And so here's my good news. We can do this. The pathway to net zero can be accomplished cost effectively and sustainably. Perhaps less alarming language and stoking less fear would really go a long way here. David Attenborough, I'm a big fan. Planet Earth, we're watching with my kids, lots of good memories. I think Mr. Attenborough as the voice of the Earth. And he speaks to our predicament and solution very thoughtfully. And with this message in mind, I'll leave you just one final thought. Together, let's get to work. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Sarah Keys, and I'm the CEO of ESG Global Advisors. And I want to thank the Walrus and Suncor for having me. So of the $125 trillion needed to transform our global economy to achieve net zero by 2050 and avoid the worst impacts of climate change, about $32 trillion of that is going to be required to be spent by 2030. And it's been estimated that the private sector could provide up to 70% of that financing. This is a massive opportunity for the capital markets. So let's start with the good news, building on what John has just said. Finally, the mainstream finance and investment community has shown up, and they've shown up with a force. Not a moment too soon, I think we would all agree. COP26 in 2021 saw an unprecedented number of institutional investors not only committing to transitioning their own investment portfolios to net zero by 2050, but helping to deploy the financing that we need to achieve our clean economy. Why is this important? Well, in fact, if they are going to provide that 70% of financing, we need them on board. And what we saw at COP26 was the creation of the Glasgow Financial Sector Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ for short. Led by Mr. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, Bank of England, and former chair and head of the Financial Stability Board. It represents over 450 firms across 45 different countries, all committed to accelerating the transition to net zero in their investments. This is critical. This is the pace and scale that we need. And of note, it included 6 of Canada's largest banks, as well as several of our largest pensions and asset managers. So I ask, could it be that our climate superheroes may not wear capes, but instead crunch numbers? It's possible. But here's the challenge. Now that everybody has shown up, mainstreamed that they want to be a part of this solution, this is where the rubber hits the road. Now what? What's our plan to get there? A lot of big commitments, and now it got to be put into action. After all, if we really think about what net zero means, we need to keep our North Star in mind. That's limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels to limit what we know is irreversible, catastrophic, and the worst impacts of climate change. So, given that means we need to translate and transform just about every way we live, eat, work, travel, and invest, I don't think 2050 is that far away. So, today I was tasked with thinking about what are some of the critical levers that we can pull today to accelerate the deployment of these capital pools to actually help us stay on track for our net zero by 2050 target and spend that $32 trillion by 2030. So I do have 3 critical levers for you today. And the first is educating boards of directors on their role in overseeing the net zero transition. They're in the most powerful seats for the most influential private sector actors in the world. Boards of directors have an important role to play. In fact, I would argue I don't think we can make this transition without them. Why? Well, we need to make some pretty big decisions today, particularly when we think about long-lived assets like new infrastructure. Boards of directors have to be kept up to speed. Gone are the days of saying that climate change is not a topic for the boardroom or that it conflicts with fiduciary duty. Quite the opposite. Investors and regulators have doubled down, asking boards of directors to disclose to the world, how are you overseeing climate risk and opportunity? But let's remember, addressing climate change is as much a human challenge as it is an environmental one. So even the most seasoned of corporate directors can be forgiven if they find the net zero challenge a little bit daunting. But I think we have to leverage their knowledge, skills, and influence to really make the decisions today that are going to help us stay on the course for net zero by 2050. My second critical lever for change is establishing clear price signals. Without a concrete global price signal, the capital markets have no way to universally price in climate-related risk and opportunity into the valuation of companies. Institutional investors want this information because they believe it's going to impact their risk and return in the long term. And companies themselves need this information in order to be able to price climate-related risks, translating them from something qualitative into something hard and fast, things they can think about when they're trying to diversify business models, set long-term strategies, enter new markets, and yes, make big infrastructure investments. And the types of policies that we can use, well, we've already got a lot of these foundational tools in our toolkit. They include things like putting a price on carbon, whether through a tax or cap and trade system, but they also include valuing natural capital. Because in the net zero transition, the most effective way to measure it is to measure what matters. And that's not only GHG emission sources, but also sinks. And my third and final lever is mandating climate change disclosure for companies. Now, I'm an accountant, and the old adage, what gets measured gets managed, has never been truer when it comes to the topic of climate change. In fact, consistent and comparable disclosure is the very foundation and bedrock of our capital markets. So investors are looking for this information from companies in order to deploy that capital. And they need that consistent and comparable disclosure to be able to tell the difference between companies. And fundamentally, we've seen some pretty exciting developments in this area. Both in Canada and the US, our regulators have moved to propose new mandatory climate change disclosure rules. This will create significant progress. As companies are forced to be more transparent about how they're managing climate risks, capturing new opportunities, and preparing for the net zero transition, they're now going to be able to compete on the basis of climate action. This is a critical part of the puzzle. And fundamentally, I think, when we think about it at a global scale, we've also seen the creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board. And Canada is going to be home to its satellite office in Quebec. And while many of us may think some of these reporting developments are way overdue, I think we could all agree they're happening at a critical time in the fight against climate change. So it's my hope that by 2030, finance and sustainable finance, they're one and the same. I think we can all agree that capital markets are experiencing an unprecedented shift, unlike anything we've ever seen before. And the opportunities for investors over the next few decades are pretty exciting. So you don't have to take it from me. I thought I would leave you with a quote from the world's largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock. They manage over $10 trillion of assets. It's hard to find a large publicly traded company that doesn't have an investment ownership stake by BlackRock. And their CEO writes a letter every year, very publicly, to the CEOs of all the portfolio companies in which BlackRock invests. And this year, Larry Fink said the following: "The next 1,000 unicorns won't be search engines or social media companies. They're going to be sustainable, scalable innovators. They're going to be the startups that help us decarbonize our economy and, importantly, help make the energy transition affordable for all consumers." So I think it's safe to say the race to net zero has officially started in the capital markets. Now let's hope we cross that finish line in time. Thank you.
Who's all scared after that? Yeah, that's a pretty powerful message, and sounds like they're going to need Alberta's transfer payment soon, if it's that much money. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Stephen Buffalo. I'm the President and CEO of the Indian Resource Council of Canada. You know, and our organization represents over 130 First Nations who have produced or have direct interest in the oil and gas sector. And many of our members currently are still producing. And I know, you know, this is tough. After that, oil and gas has a bad reputation, but it's been a huge and strong economy driver for our members. It has brought jobs, contracts, and royalties, which our communities badly need. So we have a real interest in ensuring that a healthy oil and gas sector is achieving net zero for the future. When people talk about just transition, I think sometimes, in my mind, maybe roughneck drillers are now switching into installers for solar panels and wind turbines somewhere. But that's not how it's going to shape up. And if you look around, look outside, look in the harbor, you know, there's still a tremendous demand for oil and gas. And sadly, with the Russian and Ukraine conflict, it's definitely revealed a lot. We talk about democracy, we talk about humanity and ethics. Now that's at the forefront. And our country used to import this stuff and is still going to import foreign oil under strong dictatorship. So we're in a real predicament. I might get away from some of my notes here just because of that, you know, but we still have to meet a demand. There's a global demand, and you look outside, look in the harbor, you think you can shut that off next month, what that ripple effects are going to be. You know, when the Indian Resource Council looks at net zero, it's tough to see a world without oil and gas right up to 2050. But we do see a world where oil and gas is produced a lot cleaner, with low or no emissions. And we want that to be leading. Canada can be a leader in that space, producing environmentally ethical oil and gas energy for the world. And First Nations definitely want to be a part of that solution. You know, I'm also here as the chairman of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. And these are things that we're looking at currently now, where Indigenous communities, proponents, industry are partnering with our people. And we're not just talking oil and gas. We're talking infrastructure. We're talking agricultural infrastructure, talking about travel infrastructure and broadband infrastructure. You know, COVID sure revealed a lot. And some of our isolated communities did not have that access, you know, because of no internet. It's crazy how far our world has advanced that we cannot leave the house without our cell phone. You know, and you freak out, your world will end if you do lose your cell phone. And don't let me catch it, because I'll update your Facebook with something bad. But, you know, through the AIOC in Alberta, we're looking at carbon capture. We're looking at LNG, blue hydrogen. And these things are happening, and it's moving fast. You know, the technology is changing so fast. We're trying to achieve this net zero. And it's really exciting that First Nations definitely want to be a part of it. You know, there's already a boom in this sector as we see now the price of oil go up. And right now, the labor is tight. And if any of you can understand right now, some of the rigs that are out there, they're green. And that's scary. If you understand what that means, you know, it's a safety issue. And we're going to need more and more labor coming forward as part of this transition, you know, but it's still in the area of providing energy. And I know First Nations have taken a step forward to not only train and educate ourselves, but, you know, to prepare for what, you know, this net zero transition looks like. And we estimate over 400,000 Indigenous youth will enter the job market over the next decade. And a lot of our communities through training programs will have hands-on training and job flexibility. Like currently right now in Alberta, through our organization in partnership with the province of Alberta, we've deployed $120 million cleaning abandoned oil wells, reducing methane emissions. If you know anything about the oil and gas sector, an abandoned well will still emit methane. You know, so we advocated for $100 million. The province gave us 85. And they actually bumped us up another 13 million. And as of yesterday, we deployed 120 million. We've cleaned up over 1,600 abandoned wells, not including pipelines and gathering stations and facilities. But that's part of this. That's part of this transition, the reclamation part. And we take a great pride in that. But for us to move to that transition of net zero, there's a lot of work that needs still to be done. And I want to tell you, First Nations need to be a part of it. You heard a government announcement yesterday. I don't think any of the members of the Indian Resource Council were consulted on how we're going to get into this net zero. So it's really tough. It's tough. You know, a lot of our communities struggle. You know, and there's a huge difference. It's very complex. You have a lot of nations that are, for example, in this area, are very close to this major center. But think about the ones that are isolated. You know, we can't pave the road there. We can't drive a Tesla there as much as we want to. Well, some of us. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be done. A lot of consultation that needs to be done. And, you know, for First Nations, we want to make sure there's one, energy security. You're seeing transition from getting off diesel in some of their northern communities, but they might be bringing it back. You know, the reliability of what's being put in front of them is very difficult. Not every community can get a government subsidy for solar panel, wind power, or what have you. We have to find unique ways. We have to find that balance. And that's what it's, you know, being Indigenous is about, finding the balance. There's also an issue of food security. You take away some of these industries, you take away some of the ability to move things. You put it to a price point where you can't produce wheat, you can't farm cattle. Are we going to import food? You know, it's getting really tough. And those are things we need to discuss and balance, you know, and find our way. And this transition is going to take a lot of capital, as I mentioned. You know, Alberta, once again, I'm glad to know we don't need to send it to Nova Scotia. I'm just kidding. But the Alberta Federal will have this federal transfer. You know, and if you know anything about the politics, that feeds the country. Quebec will be happy. And you know what? I'm going to bet my money is on innovation of our young people and their technical advancements that they're going to make for us. You know, we've seen great strides in the oil and gas sector. You're seeing oil and gas development now that is starting to be carbon neutral or moving towards carbon neutral. And that's what we need to be. You know, we have to have a country that will be strong and be able to tell the rest of the world we're producing energy for the world, that it's not dictatorship, it's environmentally safe, it's ethically produced, and that we'll be the world leader in that. I hope we can find a balance to that. And I can tell you, tomorrow morning the sun will come up. It'll always come up, you know, but it's really, let's all do it together and not force it as much as I see it now. I'm 2 minutes over. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alicia Richins, and I'm a Sustainable Development Strategist. And I'm really happy to be here with you in this space. I've been tasked today with taking us beyond net zero. So I thought it would be really helpful to start off with a bit of a reflection activity, some imaginaries, if you will. So if you're comfortable, I welcome you to close your eyes and imagine that everything my fellow speakers said today got done. The year is 2050, and we did it! We are net zero across our economies, across our industries, across the entire planet, human civilization, across scope 1, 2, and 3, net zero. What does that world look like? What does it feel like? For me, I think about leisurely waking up with the sun, being awoken by birdsong in the spring and summer months, sharing a home with those I love, breaking bread with food that I helped to grow in community gardens and other food that came from urban farms, walking, riding my bike, taking accessible transit to a community co-working space, connecting with people in person and virtually, but most importantly, being able to match my passions to the challenges of the world. Because let's be real, life is still hard. From all those emissions back in the 2020s, some climate change impacts are already here. We're facing more frequent and more intense storms, floods, wildfires. But in my imaginings, I feel secure knowing that my community has adapted. We are resilient in the face of these challenges. And I'm proud that we are open to all those we need to welcome to our communities because they weren't so lucky. Folks, the future is already here. It just hasn't been evenly distributed yet. And as important as climate mitigation and emissions reductions are, we also need climate adaptation. We need to be protecting our coastal wetlands, building our flood defense infrastructure, developing new communications and early warning systems, decentralizing our energy grids, and expanding the access to our mass transit and expanding the development of our urban centers just as quickly as we're working to decarbonize them. Climate action requires climate justice, and we need to make sure that in this net zero future of our imaginings, that we leave no one behind. That's why I work with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. To me, they're the only framework we have today that really maps out the playing field we're living in, where every country, big or small, rich or historically plundered, is on this playing field and in this work of sustainable development together. And even more importantly, it maps out the intersections of our issues. We're not going to get this climate action without gender equality, when we know that women are on the front lines of the climate crisis every day, and they're also the leaders most passionate about making the changes and the decisions we need for climate action. We need to make sure that in this net zero future, we are serving everyone's basic needs. Universal healthcare, universal housing, universal income. We need to match our innovation with our responsibility to each other and to the land. In my imaginings of the future, I think our relationship to land is so paramount and so important. And anytime we talk about sustainable development and the SDGs and the UN system, I think it's also important that we take a moment to remember, especially as those of us living here in what is currently Canada, that we have a responsibility to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I hope that in 2050, we have actually made good on those calls, and that we're moving further forward in our work in reconciliation and in reparations to build the future that I know we all want together. So think back to that image you had in your mind. Pay attention to the details. Match your passion to the challenge. Because sustainability is about more than just emissions reduction. Climate action requires climate justice. And there's a role for all of us in the work to getting beyond net zero.
Wow, some time travel just there. Thank you to our talkers. We covered a lot. Thank you to Audrey Mascarenhas, John Esaiw, Sarah Keys, Stephen Buffalo, and just now, Alicia M. Richins. I'd now like to invite our event partner to the stage. On behalf of Suncor, please welcome Vice President of Sustainability, John Mitchell.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but the Globe Conference for me is one if this is your first time, I hope you're enjoying it. For me, the conference represents an opportunity to get together and really get some brain candy, quite frankly, and we just got a ton of it. So please help me thank the speakers again for what they did. Fantastic. The Walrus Talks are one of my favorite parts of the Globe Conference. And what my task was in the course of this event was to try to find some of the threads that tie a number of these things together. And there was one that kind of jumped out at me, and it was the power of the letter P. So let me expand on that a little bit. So this is all about progress. So what does progress look like? And we heard a lot about that in the last hour. First, it's the paralysis of polarization. Polarization erodes the solution space. It slows progress. Second, the policy and plans. We know what the destination is, but if we don't have the policies and plans to get there, we won't make progress. The portfolios and the price. What are the portfolios in the financial community that need to change in order to mobilize the investment necessary and price the risk of climate into the decisions that we're making? The predicament of production. We have demand around the world, yet we have a decarbonization agenda that we have to reconcile together. The pride of partnerships. None of us can do this alone. We need to partner with different people, and there's a lot of pride that we can draw in those partnerships. And lastly, Polaris and passion. Polaris, the North Star. What's our North Star? Where do we need to go? How do we get there? And then how do we tap into the passion of the people that are on the front lines of that change and the power of those people? So to me, there's an elegance in P and the power of ideas and the art of the possible that things like the Walrus Talks represents. So we're thrilled to be a partner. We'd love to thank the Walrus Group, thank the Globe, thank the Vancouver Convention Center, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the conference. And thank you for letting me weave together a few threads for you today.
Thank you, John. It reminds me growing up, I think a lot of us watched Sesame Street, and the episode was brought to you, this talk's brought to you by the letter P. If you enjoyed today's event, we have more coming up. For those of you in the room, there is a sheet of paper where you can sign up for our newsletter. It's the best way to stay in touch with us at the Walrus. And those watching on the live stream at home, at work, across the country and beyond, we'll send you an email and you can opt into our newsletter there. You also have in front of you a copy of the latest Walrus. Please take it home. If there's a couple extra copies, feel free to grab them. And we have a special offer for all Globe attendees today. Just for you, a full year subscription to the Walrus, 8 issues delivered to your doorstep for just $25. Just visit the Walrus table at the night market and we'll sign you up. And if you haven't already done so, when you're at the night market, be sure to stop by Suncor's space. Thank you again, John Mitchell, Jennifer Lomaz, and everyone at Suncor for making this conversation possible. Thank you as well to the annual sponsors of the Walrus, Inspire, Labatt Breweries of Canada, Air Canada, Meta and Shaw. A word that also keeps coming up at Globe 2022 is collaboration. Thank you all for collaborating with the Walrus. We look forward to seeing you at the market and online. We'll be in touch. Thanks again.